December the 7th. Friday was a very bad day for Alice and for Sam, but for different reasons. For Alice, the rot set in on Thursday evening. Susie and Alex had dropped their guard in biology. Alice was tired again in the lesson after her long walk through the forest, and they were getting very fed up with protecting her. The neutron pounced again. This time she caught her prey, and Alice was given a detention the night of her very first parents' evening. Megs was very embarrassed and very, very angry. It was a kind of parents' evening where pupils come too. So Alice had to listen again and again to reports of how she was always yawning in class, of late homework, of sloppy work. Again and again, she listened to Megs defending her with the same excuses. Oh, it's been a hard few months. Lots of changes. Her father left us. Moved into the area. I've had so much to do. Sure, she'll do better next term. Won't you, Alice? Once or twice, she even had to wipe away the tears. Alice knew that behind the smile for the teachers, the pressure in Megs was mounting. In turn, she glowered back, grunted out her replies, slouched in her chair, and shuffled reluctantly from room to room. The only light moments in the evening came when Alice joined the long line for Mr. Watkins, the fit PE teacher. He didn't even teach Alice, but everyone said he didn't have a clue who anybody was at parents' evenings, and so he always said exactly the same thing to everyone. They were right. So at least Megs left assured, but puzzled, that Alice always behaved herself and tried hard in PE. Alice could tell by the way Megs smiled in the meeting that she thought Mr. Watkins was pretty fit as well. Ugh, she thought, he's much too young for her. Ugh. The interview with Miss Newton was, of course, the blackest moment of the evening. It was the last appointment. Alice had been kind of hoping that they might run out of time. Instead, she could tell Miss Newton's patience was running very low at the end of a long day. Alice has a lot of work to do, Miss Carroll. A lot of work to do. She's got the brains, haven't you, Alice? Alice had been practicing swearing in front of the mirror, and she really wanted to tell Miss Newton to F off, right there and then, just for the hell of it. Suppose, she mumbled. But she won't apply herself. The homework is sloppy and late. She never contributes in class. Yesterday, today, she looked as if she was asleep in the lessons. It simply has to stop. Meg looked as though she was about to burst into tears. What have you got to say, Alice? The head teacher was hovering nearby, clearly wanting to encourage everyone to go home. Miss Newton, by a superhuman effort, pulled her features into a mask of concern and said rather loudly, "Is everything all right at home? Are there any problems we should know about?" Megs pulled herself back together and began to gather her things. Whatever else was happening, she wasn't playing that game. Yes, thanks, we're fine. I'll be coming back for a longer conversation about what the school's strategy is for all the problems I've been hearing about this evening. You seem very good at pointing out people's faults here, but not very good at constructive solutions, except for the nice Mr. Watkins. Good night. Set and matched to Meg's, thought Alice, as she was dragged by the hand through the main school door. There was much nose blowing and wiping of eyes before Megs could start the car. All right, Mum, said Alice. Shut up, madam, and just shut up, okay? I'll deal with you when we get home. I have never been so humiliated in my entire life. Megs turned the ignition key and pressed the accelerator to the floor. The engine turned over, but the car would not start. She did the same a second and a third time. Nothing. Meg swore, as Alice had never heard her swear before, and she thumped the dashboard. There was a tap at the driver's window, which had steamed up, and Megs wound it down. Hi, Andrew Watkins. We met inside a few minutes ago. Mrs. Carroll, isn't it? Anything I can do to help? Car won't start, said Megs, wiping her eyes. Hop out. Let me give it a try. Evening, Lucy. It's Alice, said Alice. Of course it is, said fit Mr. Watkins, winking at her. I think I can see what's happened. He pushed in the choke and gave the slightest of touches on the key, and the engine sputtered into life. "There we go, Mrs. Carroll," he said, leaping out of the car and standing, Alice thought, rather too close to her mum. Megs didn't seem to mind and made no move to get into the driver's seat. "It's Megs," she said, holding out a hand. "Andrew, pleased to meet you. I don't think I've seen you here before." "We've just moved into the area, Gordon Hill." "Oh, I know that part well. It's just around the corner from my flat." "Oh," said Megs, "that's nice. Perhaps see you around then. Thanks for your help and for what you said about Alice tonight." "Cool," said Mr. Watkins, and Alice cringed. Megs got back into the car. "Oh, and don't be embarrassed or anything, but I don't actually teach your daughter. It's a bit of a school joke, I think. Quite a few of them queue up to see me on these evenings, and I try not to show them up. Teenage girls, you know." "Quite," said Megs, blushing and crashing the gears in the rush to get away and winding up the window. "Wait till I get you home, young lady. Do not say a word, not a word." So Alice had the 10-minute drive home to think of all the things that were wrong with her mum. When they got home, Megs was angry and tired and upset and let fly at Alice. And Alice let fly back. She told Megs it was her fault Dad had left, that she was impossible to live with, that she always felt sorry for herself, that she had no time for Alice, that Alice didn't care what she thought. And quite a few of the new swear words she'd been practicing came rushing out. Alice stormed off to her room, slammed the door, and lay face down on the bed. A few minutes later, she opened the bedroom door so she could hear her mum talking on the phone to her dad. "Nick, look, sorry to ring so late. I'm in a bit of a state about Alice. It was parents' evening tonight, absolute disaster. She's clearly been much more affected by all the changes than I thought. I just don't know what to do. I really think we need to talk." Alice got up and slammed the door again, just for effect really, and sobbed herself to sleep. The next morning, you could cut the atmosphere in the house with a blunt butter knife. Sam clearly had a lot on his mind. Megs had let him know that she needed some support, but it was just one more thing to cope with. "Sis, I've got problems of my own right now. Back off, okay?" Alice and Megs were not speaking at all. Breakfast and the journey to school were in complete silence. Alice was like a bear with a sore head with Alex and Susie. And she called Lauren Graham a stuck-up cow after break for no reason, and very nearly got into a fight with Elaine Webster, the toughest girl in the year. Fit Mr. Watkins smiled at her a couple of times in the corridor, making her want to run to the toilets and throw up. Miss Newton looked daggers at her when she arrived at the labs for chemistry. No biology today, thank goodness. When she got home, there was no message from Sam, and for the first time, she couldn't be bothered to ring him. What was the point of passing a test in the world of the calendar if all this stuff was happening to her now? Meanwhile, Sam had been wrestling with his own problems. Outwardly, at least, things were okay. The wretched report was finished and handed in, although Sam had no real enthusiasm for it. But at least Richard was off his back now for a little while. He and Josie had agreed to spend some time together at the weekend to think about what to do. Sam knew he was going to have to make some choices. He knew his life was simply drifting, but he was also very frightened. The adventures in the calendar were helping in some ways, but they also made certain things much clearer, which was very uncomfortable. All of this meant Sam had too much to deal with that Friday. And like Alice, he snapped at Megs, growled at Richard, been too sharp with Josie, and even told Tizzy to back off. A week ago, he thought, he would have simply drowned out all the noise and gone off to the pub after work. 3 different people rang to ask him, but he made excuses. If there were any answers, he knew by now that he would find them somehow through the journeys through the calendar. At home, Alice just sat quietly in the living room, hugging a cushion, staring across at the calendar wall. 6 doors open: the candle, the dove, the garden, the grapes, the eagle in flight, the golden thread. Despite herself, she came closer and looked at each in turn, thinking, wondering, wanting things to be different. The memories of each experience came back as she looked into the doorways. What was it all about? She knew it had to have some kind of meaning. She caught a glimpse of her face reflected in the windows, tear-stained, moody. Why did she have to be like that? Why was she everything she didn't want to be inside? Somehow the calendar was helping her to see at least that more clearly. The back door opened, and Sam called through softly in case Megs was back. Home. You there, Alice? In here, she called back, turning to look at the calendar again. And she felt a tingle of excitement. A seventh door was there. 2 miniature stone columns on either side of a door, overlaid with what looked like tarnished gold. Sam, the door has opened. Do you have the code? Arrived 2 minutes ago. I was just parking the car. Suffering centipedes, you look awful. You don't look that good yourself. Have you eaten today? Come to think of it, no. Too much going on, I think. But here's the code. Very simple today. 6:6. Wonder what these numbers mean anyway. I thought they were just random codes, said Alice. Do you think there is something more? 6:6. There. And Sam peered closely at the calendar. The tiny golden doors began to open, but inwards. How could that happen? A narrow line appeared down the centre and grew bigger. This time, the first thing they noticed was the music. The deep sound of what sounded like a football stadium of top-class male voice choirs filled the room in slow, rhythmic chant on a bass line. Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. The power of the sound grew as the doors opened. The whole house began to shake, not able to contain the song. And a choir of women's voices came in with sharp, clear harmonies to the same words, leaping and tripping across the bass lines. Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. The power of the harmonies seemed to cause the living room, the house, and their entire world to shake and then simply to melt away. Drumming began underneath the bass sound, a steady, syncopated rhythm, reminding Sam of African dance music. Alice looked around. She and Sam were in the centre of vast open space surrounded by a colonnade. All around them were pilgrims, pouring in through the many gates in the colonnade, summoned, it seemed, by the choir and the musicians. The crowd took up the simple songs, swaying and rocking and dancing in time to the music's gentle rhythms. Kadosh, 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 Adonai, Sevaoth, Kadosh. At the top of the steps, the entrance to an inner courtyard, trumpeters sounded a rippling fanfare. The male choir continued its rhythmic chant, whilst the women changed their song, singing the words over and over until Alice knew them by heart and could join in. Adonai, Sevaoth, Milo, Kol Charatz, Kavodo, Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. As the pilgrims poured into the vast space, all bound together in the music and the rhythm of dance, so Alice and Sam were gradually pressed forwards towards the steps. On each side of the stairway, the crowds parted. Men and women and children were there from every race and in every kind of national dress. All joined in the song and moved together. Every face was alive with joy and hope. On either side, the people turned back towards Alice and Sam, holding out their hands in welcome, smiling and beckoning them forward. Sam and Alice held back. Without a word being spoken, both of them became aware of what they had been feeling all of that day and the day before, but couldn't name. A deep sense of not being worthy, a discontent with the person they had become. A thin young man stepped out of the darkened doorway at the top of the stairs and came down to welcome them. He too held out his arms and motioned for them to climb the stairs and enter. With each step Alice took, her sense of unworthiness grew. She remembered how she had looked in the mirror, the way she had treated her friends at school, most of all the stuff she'd said to Megs. Sam's mind was on the shallowness of his life, the way he always ran away from problems and couldn't help it, and his responsibilities to Josie. The trumpets stopped. The drum beats were hushed. The singing dropped to a deep, soft whisper all across the courtyard, filling the space. Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. Adonai Sevaoth Milo Kol Charatz Kavodo. Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. Sam and Alice reached the entrance to the building, and the young man took them up through the immense doorway. Once inside, there was a sense of vast empty space and a great deep stillness, all the silence in the world gathered into one place. Somehow, the inside was bigger than the outside, and the building stretched away above and in front of them. The only light came from a brazier of hot coals just a few meters away. Without knowing why, both Alice and Sam fell to their knees just a few steps inside the entrance. The sense of unworthiness was still growing inside each of them. This was such a special place. Without a word, when he saw they were kneeling, the slender young man walked towards the brazier of hot coals. He took some tongs from the floor beside the brazier and with great care picked up one of the coals. Carefully and slowly, in the silence, he carried the glowing coal towards Alice and Sam as they knelt side by side. When he stopped before them, he held out the coal first towards Sam, stopping a few inches before his face. Instinctively, Sam moved his head backwards. The young man motioned to him not to be afraid. Sam took Alice's hand as the man moved the tongs nearer until the red-hot coal just touched Sam's lips. Alice felt Sam squeeze her hand tight in a moment of pain and then relax. A moment later, and the coal was offered to Alice. Bravely, she did not flinch. The stab of pain on her lips was sharp and clean. And after that, Alice felt a warm, cleansing fire move slowly from her lips to her head, to heart, and then to her hands and feet. And suddenly that sense of unworthiness was gone. Sam and Alice remained on their knees, heads bowed. The young man raised them to their feet, saying, "Welcome to this new part of the adventure." Alice and Sam could not reply. For both of them, the moment was too special for words. There was a fire playing on their lips and in their minds and on their hearts, burning, cleansing, making anew. "I am Cole," said the young man solemnly, "your guide for this day and 5 more. We'll speak again in a different place." Cole signalled to them to move back now to the building's entrance. Sam and Alice did as they were asked, still not able to speak. They came out of the great silence of the hall and towards the courtyard. And the soft singing and music still filled the air, more gentle now. Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. Slowly as they crossed the threshold, the courtyard faded from view and they stood side by side in the living room. The chanting continued for a few moments more, then it too faded into the distance. For a few seconds, Alice stood looking at her reflection in the front windows, holding her own gaze. The fire was still there, playing inside her. There was so much that had to be put right. Then with Sam, she turned towards the calendar. Right in the centre of the top half of the calendar stood an open door, a slip of gold on each side flanked by a delicate stone column. In the centre of the doorway was a tiny brazier of coals. Whenever she looked through the doorway in the coming days, Alice felt the pain and the wonder of fire on her lips.